So hello, in this lesson we will talk about export. So we will learn how to export our scene as an image or video and how to export and embed our scene into the web. In Spline, you can divide your creation into two types, 3D for the web and 3D for media. So depends on what you want to export. There are some hows you can do it. Let's first of all look through the list of export options. In Spline, when you are ready to export your scene, press the export button. Then you will see this window. First and most common tab here is the public URL. So you can easily share your scene and anyone can experience what you have done by this link. So for example, you can share this link via social media. Or at some places, you can even embed your scene. So from here, you can copy code for embedding. Also, there are some options here and place settings in this tab. We will back to these settings later. For now, let's see what else we have. The viewer also allows you to export and integrate your scene into the web, and most of the time, this way is preferable. Code export, another option for how to export and integrate your scene. For example, if you want to embed your scene into the Webflow project, we will do it from this tab. So these first three options are about exporting your scene for the next web integration. When you export your scene for the web experience, first of all, you need to be sure that your scene is optimized as much as possible because it will influence website's performance. But if you just want to export your scene as an image, your scene could use high-quality things such as detailed shadows and high-poly objects, and etc. So here, you can export your scene just an image. Here, you can export your scene as a video, which we will do later in this video. 3D formats, a quite useful option, but I didn't use them a lot. The idea is that you can export your scene or object as one of these formats and continue work on them in other 3D tools. Or for example, you can export your scene, for example, for creating an iOS AR experience, but this option is the same as 3D formats, but for iOS AR, you need USDZ format. 3D printing as well, just a special format here. And finally, you can just save your scene as a local Spline files. We will see how to export our scene as an image, video, and how to export and embed our 3D scene into the web. Let's start with an image because this is the easiest option. Here we have our mesh object. Before export, I can do some post-production work, so I can add some effects to my scene. To do that, I can turn off effects in the project panel. Let's see which effects we have here. Pixelation will make some kind of 8-bit filter, and here I can configure granularity. Then we have the aberration, which will create this stereo picture effect. Here I can configure the offset of these colorful copies. Bloom effect I use a lot when I need to imitate the glare of light. Here we will stop for more details. You can see this flare, and here we can manage size. I always use huge. Then we can manage intensity. I always select the value where I still can see the object, because for example, if I will do like that, it's too strong. Blur scale, like blur shadow, but for flare, 1 is maximum. The threshold here is an important setting, because it helps you to manage flare areas. When you move the threshold to the right, then only the widest areas will be highlighted. Smoothing, look at this like transparency. So after playing with these options, we can set this nice glare. It makes our scene more realistic. I always use this bloom effect when I have some glossy plastic, chrome metal or glass on a black background. Then we have hue, so you can change colors and saturation for the whole scene. Then we have brightness and contrast. So before export, you can tune your image and make it juicy. Vignette, like everywhere, creates this dark rounded blurred frame. And the noise. Sometimes noise could help you achieve nice stylization, for example, when you need to achieve the retro effect. So for this scene, I set the bloom and brightness. I can quickly switch this toggle to see the difference, and with this effect, it looks much better. So now I'm ready to export my image. I could press Export, Image tab, and then I can select a format, for example JPEG. Then I can select Ratio, which is scale, so when it's 1 and you didn't set the frame size before, then the size of this image will equal to your screen size. But if you have a JPEG image, this background color switcher will not work because it's not possible to have transparency in the JPEG format. It doesn't support the alpha channel. So if you want to export your object as an image without background, choose PNG. Also, think about framing before exporting the image. I mean, yeah, you could export your image like that, but if you have only one object, why you need to export all this area? Better, before exporting, set the frame size by clicking on this icon. For this object, 600 and 600 will be perfect. Then I can press export and set ratio 2. So my image size after export would be 1200 per 1200 pixels. And then I can put my image in my design in Figma, for example. So before exporting your scene or object as an image, you can apply effects, set frame size, and export it as a JPEG or a PNG image, with or without background. But we actually have animated this object, and here we have our floating animation. What if I want to share in the social media a video clip of this animation? I press export and select video recording. The thing here is that you do not export your scene as a video. From here you will start screen recording, and only after that recording will be saved as a video. So here we can select the end format between MP4, WebM, GIF, and image sequence. I recommend you save your video in MP4 format. FPS is a frame per second, and default 30 is enough. But if you want to have a super high quality video, you can set it up to 60. But if you set 15, you can achieve an animation with a stop motion effect. Ratio here is the same, like in the image, it's a size scale. Megabits per second is a video bitrate, so the bigger this option, the better the quality of your video, but the bigger the size of this video would be. I can suggest you to stay at this default value if you're gonna share your video on the social media. And then we have a timer dropdown. When we're talking about video export, this setting is important to know. Here we have two options, manual and fixed. If I select fixed, that means I can change the duration of my video. So as soon as the recording starts, then it will record for 5 seconds. Let's try press start. We see our scene in play mode, but now we have these controls. We see a timer with 5 seconds and the record button. Press record, and the good things here is that animation starts from the beginning with the recording. And we have our video. But here I want to share with you one life hack. If you publish somewhere video like that, this video in some social media can be replayed automatically, so it will play continuously, and knowing it, you can prepare your video in a way where between the end and start there is no gap. To do that, you need to set the right time for the duration. Our rotating animation takes 10 seconds, 10 seconds for a full rotation. Plus we have floating animation, which takes 3 seconds. So for one full spin, our object will be moved up and down 10 divided 3 equal 3.3 times. We need to have an integer number here. So for example, we can set 8 seconds for rotating and 2 seconds for floating, or 10 seconds rotating and 5 seconds floating. Let's try 10 seconds for rotating and 5 seconds for floating, and then, when we are ready to export, set the duration to 10. And now, we have the video where the last frame matches with the first one, which will make this video in case of auto-repeat play continuously without any gaps. But when you're gonna export your scene as a video, in time dropdown you can select manual, so when you start recording, you can start and then stop recording when you decided. Now let's talk about the biggest part, how to export and embed your scene into the web. First of all, before exporting, you should do the following things. First, optimize your scene. Your spline scene will influence website's performance and loading time, so it's quite important to prepare and optimize your scene. How to optimize your scene you will learn in the next video. The second is set place settings. When we click export in the public URL tab, viewer and code export, you can find place setting tab. In place settings tab, you can select which scene will be played. Remember that on the free spline version, you can have up to 3 scenes. Then you can choose camera. If you don't have any cameras, then it would be personal camera. Logo section, you can hide logo, but to do that, you need a paid subscription. Then you can hide the background color. So if you have simple scene with some object, for example, and you need to embed your spline scene without background, you can hide it. So then, when you embed your spline, you will see the web page background. But remember, when you have glass material, and if you will export your scene without background, this glass material wouldn't be transparent. It just doesn't work like that. Let's back to the play settings. Then we have the page scroll switcher. By default, it sets on yes. So it means when you will scroll your web page, while the pointer will be on spline container, the page will scroll. Otherwise, you can turn it off, so from spline scene container, it wouldn't be possible to scroll the page. It's quite important option and of course depends on situation, so just remember, when you have the situation where you don't need to scroll web page while pointer on a spline container, you can turn it off here. Then we have cursor visibility. So you can turn off the mouse pointer icon while it hovering spline container. For example, you create your own cursor with some objects and follow event. Then you can hide default cursor from here. Then we have the next section where you can set play interactions. So by default, they all turned on. So while playing your scene, you can rotate it, move it, and zoom. And if you want, you can turn it off. So for example, you don't want to users be able to rotate your scene like that. Then just turn off orbiting. Below we have touch settings. So here you can set how users will interact with your scene through the touch screens from phones and tablets. Here you can set, for example, by one finger, user can orbit in, with 2 fingers, pan, zoom, or it turned on, and then user will use classic pinching gesture to zoom, or you can turn it off. And page scroll, the same as before, but from finger perspective. Can user scroll page if user swipe on spline container? Next option, on hover. You can turn it on and then you'll have a nice interaction while hovering your scene. It's quite useful option because immediately make your scene depth for users, so they understand that this is a 3D scene very quick. Here you can switch between orbit and pan, but I most of the time use orbit camera, and below you can set sensitivity and damping. My recommendation just would be do not set too high sensitivity and damping, but again, it depends only on your idea and stylization. If you don't turn off orbit, pan and zoom from this section, you can set limits. So, for example, by default, I can orbit scene in every direction and I can see the scene from every side. But I can set limits for orbiting, and now, for example, I can't fully rotate the scene. So sometimes limits quite useful. And the same for pan and zoom. In case of zoom, you just need to set minimum and maximum. So if 100 is default, minimum is how far object would be, maximum is how close. Then we have animated turntable. So if you want your scene or object be rotated, you can or add animation or just activate this option. So here you can set speed and direction. Speed here is not a time, just some spline value. The lower this value, the slower rotation will be. Next setting is events behavior and trigger dropdown. So here we can select if we have a case where object with a trigger is covered by the other object. Can we still interact with this object behind? Can we click on it? If stop at object, then no, we can't. If pass through object, then we can. Next we have materials section. Here for now we can only select the level of the glass material precision, high or normal. And again, better to keep it normal from performance perspective. And the last thing here, compression. You can choose what you want to be your scene performing well or looking good. Well, in most cases, better to stay on default value. So when you finished with these settings for your scene, you can go back and choose how to export your scene by URL, viewer, or code export. Well, which option select is depends on web platform you're gonna embed it. Let's have 3 examples. Let's embed our 3D scene in the Notion page, Framer, and Webflow. So this is my scene, and this is my Notion page where I'm gonna add this scene. In Notion, I press plus and then add embed container. Then I have this dialog where I need to put a link. So I go back to Spline, to the export window, and in the public URL, I copy this link. And then I paste it there. Ta-da! My Spline scene in Notion. When I will change something in my Spline scene, I only need to update public URL here, so link address I put it before will be always the same, and I don't need to put a new link every time after update. I just need to refresh Notion page. But example with Notion is the simplest one. Now let's embed our scene we designed before in the Framer. So let's go to the Framer where I prepared some simple web page. Here I want to be spline scene be here. First of all, I need to add embed container. Select Insert, Utility, Embed. Now I will position this container here and set some size settings. Okay, now I go back to Spline, press Export, and this time I go with Viewer, and this time I will copy this. Back to Framer, select Embed Container, and here in the Embed section switch to HTML and paste our Spline code. Done! We have our Spline scene in the Framer. So why this time we use Viewer instead of public URL, like in case with Notion? Because Viewer provides more interesting options. For example, you can see that animation on my Spline scene works only when my mouse hovers in container. But if you go back to Spline, in the Viewer, you have the mouse event dropdown, and here you can select global instead of local. So now, after updating, animation on the Spline scene will work, even my mouse outside the container. So now let's embed our scene into the Webflow. I don't work in Webflow before, so I'm not one to usually make a stand here. But let's try. What is nice here is that Webflow supports Spline on a native level, so you can not only embed scene, but also configure some scene options right in Webflow. So to add Spline, press Add. In the Media section, find Spline Scene component. And here, to add Spline Scene into Webflow, in the Spline Export window, we need to select Code Export and copy this link. Be sure that you have Vanilla.js selected. Let's move to the Webflow and paste the link. Done. I will be honest with you, I'm not so familiar with the Webflow tool, so I just can recommend you to watch this video, where guys show the full potential of Spline native integration in the Webflow. So impressive, definitely worth it to watch. And one last thing I would like to show. Quite popular situation. This is your Spline scene with some object. You embed this scene somewhere, and this happens. While changing container size, it's or cropped or just too small. To be Spline scene responsive to the container size, in the project panel, turn on Auto Zoom. Then it will adapt to this container size. So this is for what Spline tool was invented, to give you the easiest way to design 3D interactive web experience. Create your 3D in Spline and then integrate it into the web in a few clicks. But even you may don't know about how the Spline scene will be integrated later, you anyway have to think about optimization. In the next video, I will show you how to optimize your scene for the web. See you!